I'm going to be talking to Dr. Carolin Funk, who's a partner at Blue Bear Capital LLC, about investment trends in the battery industry. So welcome to the interview, Carolin.
Thanks for having me, Markham.
Now, you call yourself an energy transition evangelist, and as a journalist who does a lot of work and reporting about the energy transition, I'm curious what you mean by that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I spent my whole career working on energy transition, stretching multiple different job types from energy, from research to R&D and to policy. And now I'm on the investment side. I worked on the corporate side and startups. So really, I'm trying to figure out along the way how energy transition can be driven forward in the most meaningful way. And I'm now on the investment side because I think directing capital into the smartest and honestly most lucrative parts of that energy transition will just speed up the process a lot. So that's why I think I use this term.
I'm kind of curious, before we get into batteries, I'd like to get your opinion on this. I often say that, 30 years ago, policy and subsidies, that sort of thing, were necessary to kind of prime the pump, the energy transition pump, as it were. But now all of these technologies are becoming so cost-effective and competitive in the marketplace that renewables, batteries, electric vehicles, this kind of, they really are capital and markets are driving the transition more than policy. I just want your take on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. And actually, that's one reason why I moved to the Bay Area over from Berlin 10 years ago, because policy was going very slow. And there's a lot of already then opportunity to drive the markets forward through product innovation, research, and just cost curve driving down and such. So especially in the battery space, I think that we shouldn't overlook that there is still a need for regulation to support the adoption. And we see that here in California with EV adoption being, I think, still at the forefront across the globe, just because of the requirements and emission standards that we have here. The same being with emissions on the grid. So I think everything goes hand in hand. We have to have the technologies available at the right price, but we also have to educate our regulators to say, hey, this is available and now you can make use of it. Another example could be just the drivers behind kind of more sustainable supply chains, carbon emission standards and tracking. So I think I wouldn't dismiss the regulatory space as quickly. But I think we can do a lot through consumer education and just great technologies driving the costs even lower.
Well, let's talk about batteries. Where is the smart money going in the battery sector these days?
That's a very broad question. So I think from my perspective, there are two big drivers in the battery sectors in terms of volumes of batteries that are being deployed across the globe. One is obviously in the electric vehicle infrastructure and electric vehicle space in general. And with electric vehicles, I don't just mean passenger vehicles like cars, like Teslas and Nissans and VWs everybody's talking about, but think about buses, think about construction equipment, ferries, like all kinds of vehicles that today still mostly move around using fossil fuels and can be electrified. And then there is the stationary battery part, where a lot of growth is happening, both on grid kind of tied batteries on the utility side, plus also residential batteries for different use cases. And then there are a ton of other applications in other sectors, thinking about robotics and drones and satellites, things like that. But I think the first two are the major ones where we see a lot of money going and a lot of product adoption.
There's a lot of investment these days in grid scale, utility scale battery systems, and often paired with solar. What is the investment community thinking about that? Or is that an area that's exciting for them?
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. I think it really depends on the market structure. So there are different market incentives to that, and I would say that especially in some more unregulated markets like Texas, or for example in the UK, there are some really good business models for those types of batteries. They compete with other systems, not just other energy storage systems, but other systems that use energy. I mean, just mentioning, for example, like Bitcoin miners might be able to use electricity while it's cheap in the grid in a very lucrative way. So yeah, it really depends on the market structure and the market design.
And is that one of the reasons why California is adding so much battery storage to their grid? Because of their, I mean, they have the policy framework that they want to encourage growth in renewables, but they also have a market structure for their generation and transmission. And does that help in terms of the rate of adoption for battery systems?
Well, I think a lot is driven in California around the general decarbonization of the grid. So trying to get less fossil fuels into the grid, which is driven by wind and solar. That's what we mostly have here. There's some hydro. We're again and still in a drought in California. So that's just what is available. And the intermittency of wind and solar, and especially the very quick increase of these renewable resources, require some kind of buffer. And honestly, the low-hanging fruit at this point, and it's funny because 10 years ago nobody would have called that a low-hanging fruit, are batteries. And so I think that's more the driver rather than specific, like it specifically being very lucrative here. There are markets where deploying energy storage is actually more lucrative from an investment perspective, like I mentioned in Texas. But to add to that, we're also have a shortage on, or there's a shortage on energy supply in California. So we can import more, or we can use some of the terawatt hours of curtailed solar energy in storage and make that usable at different times of the day.
Now, what about battery research? Are there any exciting developments coming on the research side that might improve energy density or longevity or safety, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, we've spent a lot of money already in battery research, and it's gotten us very far. I think that on the material side, there's still a lot to explore. I think that on the just like solid state, different types of chemistries, different type of batteries. I think like we'll see a lot of development going forward. But actually, being an energy transition evangelist, the IPCC tells us that we have 8 years to really make this transition happen. So I'm actually more excited than what's coming down the research pike about the stuff we already have and the improvements that we can get to through improvements in manufacturing, in supply chain, in product development, and actually in educating customers on, well, this is how you use an electric vehicle, this is how you fuel an electric vehicle, versus kind of hoping for the holy grail coming in the next 15 or 20 years.
What's private capital's role in all of that, Carolin? Where does that private money have to go to have the most benefit in terms of helping us get to the targets we need to by 2030?
Well, I'd say, there are the two different sides. One, on the public market, we've seen some battery companies or companies that build products based on batteries become very lucrative over the last year. So, of course, the Tesla example has kind of stirred up the whole automotive industry, and the Rivian going public, the valuation that was higher than VW kind of also got people to kind of scratching their heads. And now Volvo spinning out Polestar as a standalone entity. I think on the public side, there's a lot of there's a lot of interest in investing in these types of companies, just because people are understanding that is the future. And I think that just drives change, because with those examples, you might be able to get a higher market cap if you improve on your electrification strategy. Then on the other hand, you have the private markets, and which we are part of as a venture capital investor, and for us and for our friends in the kind of private equity space, it's really interesting to figure out what are the new business models that we can invest in. What are the new energy assets that people can invest in that will be lucrative in the future? So think about like electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which is a great asset. We still have to figure out some of the business models on fast charging, and how people can kind of make money at these locations. But putting copper and batteries in the ground, so to say, at the location is, I see a lot of interest of funds into those spaces. For me personally, we focus a bit more on the software side. So battery management, battery optimization, using AI and machine learning to deploy these assets in the field in the best way, and kind of selling the shovels and the gold rush to those people who are deploying the hardware in the fields. That's an area I'm personally really excited about.
Is there enough capital available to do what needs to be done in the United States? I remember during the campaign of 2020, President Biden talking about how the US had been overtaken by China, and he was going to put in place policies that would put America back in the driver's seat, I think is the way he put it, by 2030. And is there enough capital interested in those industries, in the battery industry, to get the job done?
Yeah, if I knew that, I would say that no, there's not. Is the short answer, because we need a lot of infrastructure build out, and the infrastructure package that has been discussed and part of it approved is going in the right direction. Because what the big problem that we have in the energy sector is that we have this aging electricity grid that is basically designed on the needs from 70, 80 years ago. Now we have these bidirectional forces on the grid. We're prosumers. I'm generating solar right now, feeding that back into the grid and into my home battery. Somebody has to deal with all that kind of load shifting and such. So the grid is just not designed for where we are today. And we need investments in that space, and that is going really slowly. I think what just came out of the Biden administration and White House yesterday is an announcement to invest on domestic critical minerals and the supply chain for that. I think that's an area where we haven't seen enough investment in, let's say, the Western world to really figure out how to get to these minerals that we need for that energy transition, and or other types of materials that could replace these minerals.
Well, let's talk about critical minerals for a while. I'm interested in this because I'm located in Canada, and the United States has shown a lot of interest. We've had some high-level meetings between the Biden administration and the Canadian government about building out the critical mineral industry here in Canada. Apparently, we have the deposits, and we have a fairly large mining industry. And I think they see the two countries coming together to build that supply chain to provide the critical minerals for the battery plants. What's your take on that from an investor's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, we're spending a lot of time looking at innovation in the mining space, making mines more energy efficient, make mines more sustainable, but also on the exploration side, just using more of the, let's call it the 21st century technologies like IoT, machine learning, AI, satellite data, things, drone data, things that we might not have had available just a couple of years ago. And I think there can be a lot done through technology. We have lots of, for example, silicon resources in California and the Western United States. We would just have to figure out how to make them accessible. Same with these critical minerals in Canada. And one thing I would love to ask the audience is, this is still early stages of that battery industry. We will find replacements for some of these minerals. Please don't think that we can just simply multiply the use of rare earth materials as we need them today in battery manufacturing and just multiply that over the future. We're going to make lots of improvements based on new research, but also markets and pricing. So this is like the first combustion engines that were developed in the, I don't know, 1920s. They were not as efficient and not as streamlined in their production as they are today.
Well, let's talk about battery recycling. That would seem to be a source of critical minerals. And as an investor, are you looking at battery recycling and the circular economy?
Totally. Actually, in all our investments, we look at the environmental, social, and governance impacts and track those. So we're doing really the research before making any investments. What's the impact of those companies? But specifically in battery recycling and battery reuse, meaning that we don't have to take the batteries apart to their bare bones, and then getting to the bare minerals and materials for a secondary application. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's also a lot of opportunity through software and data to make this process much more streamlined, rather than kind of getting kind of a black box from an automotive OEM and saying, here's a battery, take it apart, really getting the data that has been tracked throughout the life cycle of the battery from kind of the first manufacturing all the way to the end of first life will inform the recycling or reuse industry so much. So I'd actually ask for any regulators, could we please make this data available across kind of the life cycle of a battery? Because we could save a lot of resources by just having that.
If I understand you correctly, having battery data and being able to manage that could extend the life of the battery?
Well, it could extend the life of the battery, and it could inform the second use case of the battery. Because it's different if the battery has been in operation in kind of your area where it might be a lot colder, bigger temperature differences, versus where I am, where it's probably more kind of stable. And so really understanding what has the battery endured throughout its lifetime can get it easily into a secondary application, or can just say, well, that battery is probably not useful for anything anymore. Let's take it apart.
Last question, Carolin. What about, and you mentioned, that we're in the early stages of developing batteries. And what about designs like lithium iron phosphate that really don't have any critical minerals in them? Will we see more designs like that?
Yeah, totally. And we will see more kind of nanomaterials and other like non-critical mineral based materials developing for sure.
Great. Well, Carolin, thank you very much. It's been very enlightening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be with you.